Edinburgh in October is a city that cannot decide whether it wants to be beautiful or brutal. The wind comes off the North Sea with a particular kind of purpose, cutting through coats and scarves and all sensible precautions. The sky is the color of pewter for days at a time, and then with no warning, it splits open into something extraordinary, a gold and pink light that makes the old stone buildings glow like they're lit from within. And you understand why poets have been writing about this city for 800 years. I loved Edinburgh with the particular intensity of someone who has adopted a place rather than been born into it. I had arrived the previous September from the flat, sun-baked sprawl of San Antonio and the shock of the cold, the gray. The vertical geography of a city built on volcanic hills had felt, improbably, like relief. Like I had been squinting against too much brightness my whole life, and here was somewhere, with softer light. The Tuesday it happened was not one of the beautiful days. Rain had been falling since morning with that particular Scottish commitment. Not dramatic rain, but the kind that is simply always there. A constant gray curtain that makes you wonder if perhaps the sun is a myth. I had spent the morning in the library working on a chapter of my thesis, a comparative analysis of unreliable narrators in 20th century women's fiction, and by early afternoon my eyes hurt and my coffee had long since gone cold, and I needed to eat something that was not a granola bar from my bag. The university cafeteria was packed. The rain always drove everyone inside, and the warm, noisy space smelled of soup and wet wool and coffee. I collected a bowl of soup and a chunk of bread and scanned the room for somewhere to sit. Every table seemed full. The low roar of conversation pressing against the big windows where raindrops raced each other toward the sills. I found a half-empty table near the window, occupied only by a young woman who was actually reading. A real book with both hands around it, unheedful of the noise around her. I asked if I could sit. She looked up. That was the look. I have tried many times to describe it. It was not a spectacular look. She was not gazing at me with particular intensity or warmth. It was, if anything, a perfectly ordinary look, the glance of someone interrupted from their reading, assessing the polite request of a stranger. Her eyes, which I would later come to know, were the precise green-gray of sea glass. A meaty mind for a beat, then two, then there it was one beat too many, and in that one extra beat, something happened in my chest that I had no word for then and only have inadequate words for now. It was like a key turning in a lock I hadn't known existed. It was like hearing at the exact frequency that makes it impossible to unhear. A sound you've been missing your whole life without knowing it, she said. Of course, and moved her bag from the chair beside her to make room. I sat down. I ate my soup. I stared out the window at the rain. I did not look at her again for 3 minutes. And those 3 minutes were some of the most effortful of my life. Her name, I would eventually learn, was Rowan. She was 25, a second-year PhD student in environmental science. Originally from a small town in the Scottish borders called Jedburgh that I had never heard of and that she described with the precise fondness of someone who has both loved and outgrown a place as all hills and gossip and very good pastry. She had short dark hair cut close at the sides and longer on top, pushed back from her face with what I suspected was complete indifference to its styling. She was wearing a dark green coat that she had not taken off despite the warmth of the cafeteria. And she had a small scar at the corner of her left eyebrow that I would only notice later, that second cup of coffee. The one where we had stopped being strangers, but I am getting to that after 3 minutes of determined window gazing. Something made me look back. I am a literary scholar by training and inclination. I believe deeply in the construction of narrative and the idea that stories mean things. So I'm not going to say that what made me look was nothing. Something made me look. Something that I had spent 23 years carefully not listening to. Had apparently decided that enough was enough. She was reading again, chin resting on one hand, completely absorbed. The book was face down and I tilted my head slightly to read the spine. Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. I knew it, a beautiful book about the relationship between indigenous plant knowledge and Western botany. Written with the lyricism of someone who loved both the science and the story of the natural world. That's a wonderful book, I said. My voice surprised me. I had not exactly decided to speak. She looked up again. And this time there was something different in her expression, a small, genuine surprise, and then something that opened like a window. You've read it? She said. Her accent was Scottish, soft, the vowels rounded and warm. I cried 3 times, I said. She laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a social obligation laugh, but a real one, sudden and bright, that rearranged her whole face into something so open and unguarded that I felt, distinctly and alarmingly, like I had been given a gift. The chapter about the pecan grove, she said. I'm not even at that part yet. I'm dreading it. It's worth it, I said. She closed the book with her thumb holding her page and looked at me with what I can only describe as genuine attention, that rare quality of being actually looked at, rather than merely seen. You're American, she said. Texas, I said, though I'm trying not to hold that against myself. She laughed again, that same sudden, real laugh, and said, I'm Rowan. Nadia, I said, duh, and there it was. The beginning of the most important conversation of my life. Started with a book and a laugh and the sound of rain against a cafeteria window. We talked for an hour and 20 minutes. I know the time because I was supposed to meet my thesis supervisor at 3 and looked up at the clock with a jolt of panic to find that it was already 1:45. I said with a regret that surprised me with its intensity that I had to go. It was nice to meet you, Nadia from Texas, Rowan said. And the way she said my name with that specific cadence, like it was something she was tasting, made me want to stay. I was halfway to the door before I turned around. She was watching me go. I don't know why I registered that I was not in the habit of turning around to check if strangers were watching me leave rooms. That book, I said, across the noise of the cafeteria. When you finish it, there's another one you'd like. I'll tell you about it. If I see you again. She held up a hand. Not a wave, a sort of acknowledgement, a promise. If you see me again, she said. I saw her again 4 days later, in the same cafeteria, at the same table. I don't think either of us was there by accident. The second meeting lasted 2 hours. We had moved from the cafeteria, which was closing when we arrived, to a small coffee shop on the Royal Mile called the Elephant House, which has a particular fame as one of the places where J.K. Rowling wrote the early Harry Potter books in the 90s. I had been there before. It was the kind of place where the tables were small and close together and the ceiling was hung with wooden elephants and the coffee was reliably good. It felt later like an appropriate location for something that was also quietly becoming its own kind of magic. We talked about books. About our research, she was studying the mycorrhizal networks of forest ecosystems, the underground fungal systems through which trees share nutrients and information, what some scientists had started calling the Wood Wide Web. I found this so beautiful and strange that I asked her to explain it 3 times in 3 different ways, just to hear her talk about it. You're genuinely interested, she said at one point, with a slight note of surprise. Why wouldn't I be? She considered this. Most people's eyes glaze over at about the word mycorrhizal, she said. Most people are wrong, I said. And she smiled, and I felt that thing in my chest again. The key in the lock, warm and insistent. I told her about my thesis, about my love for the way unreliable narrators expose not just the gaps in a story, but the gaps in a consciousness, how what a narrator chooses not to tell you is as important as what they do. She listened in that particular way she had, completely still, eyes on my face, with a quality of attention that felt like a physical thing, like warmth. So you think people are unreliable narrators of their own lives, she said. I think everyone is, I said. I think we tell ourselves the version of our story that is least terrifying. She looked at me for a moment with something that might have been recognition. That's rather dark, she said. It's rather honest, I said. She turned her coffee cup around in her hands, a habit I would come to know well. The slow rotation of the cup when she was thinking, and said, What's the version of your story that you tell yourself? I laughed, a little nervously. We've only just met. I know, she said. I'm asking anyway. I had never been asked that question before. Not like that, not with that directness, that genuine wanting to know. Most conversations I had found were performances of mutual interest with the actual self kept carefully backstage. This was something different. This was someone walking directly toward the backstage door and knocking. I told her things I had not planned to tell anyone. About growing up between 2 languages and 2 cultures, never quite fully Mexican and never quite fully American. About the particular loneliness of being the first person in your family to leave for university abroad. the way the distance felt like both escape and exile. About writing, which I had loved since I was a child and had somehow turned into a career and sometimes worried I had loved more before it was a career. She told me about growing up in the Borders, the oldest of 3 sisters, in a household full of books and arguments, and a father who was a botanist and a mother who restored antique furniture and who, she said with a warmth that made the word mean everything, taught me that things can be both very old and completely alive. We walked out of the coffee shop at 9 o'clock into a cold, clear night, the old town rising around us in the dark like something from a fairy tale, and stood on the pavement for a moment in the mild surprise of how much time had passed. I should go, I said. I have an 8 a.m. seminar tomorrow. Where do you live? She asked. Morson Street. I'm in Fountainbridge, she said. That's practically the same direction. And so we walked. Through the grass market, past the old pub facades and the shadow of the Castle Rock, up Victoria Street with its curved, very light shop fronts, through the Cowgate and out into the quieter streets beyond. We talked the whole way. When we reached the corner where our paths diverged, we stopped. And the conversation slowed the way conversations do when the people in them don't want to end. I haven't talked like this in a very long time, Rowan said. There was something in her voice, not sadness exactly, but the echo of something that had been absent. Neither have I said. She looked at me. Edinburgh streets in the night are lit by old-fashioned lamps that turn everything amber. And in that light, her face was, I'm going to use the word and not apologize for it, beautiful. Not in a conventional way, not in the way of someone designed to be looked at, but in the way of someone whose face carries everything they have thought and felt, where the intelligence and the warmth and the slight guardedness are all visible if you look. I'd like to do this again, she said. It was simply stated, a fact rather than a question, but she left space for me to confirm or deny it. Yes, I said. I would too. She smiled, and the amber lamplight caught it, and she said, Good night. Nadia from Texas. Good night, Rowan from Jedburgh. I said. I walked home in the cold October dark and tried to name what was happening in my body, which felt like it was lit from inside with something that had no obvious source. I was happy, that much was clear. Absurdly, disproportionately happy. The way you are after a conversation that has somehow given you more than you arrived with. Told myself it was because I had found a friend. A real one, the rare kind. That was all it was. I was, at this point, an extremely unreliable narrator. I should tell you something about the version of myself that existed before Rowan, so you can understand what she was walking into without knowing it. I was, in the most fundamental sense, a person who had arranged her inner life very carefully. I was the daughter of a woman who loved fiercely and without reservation, and a father who expressed love primarily through acts of service, through showing up, through fixing things, through being there without being asked. I had grown up in a household full of feeling, but feeling that was expressed indirectly, sideways, in food and presence, in practical action rather than in words. I had learned early that the safest way to love people was to be useful to them, to be reliable, to be the person who was always fine. I was externally always fine. I had been with Daniel for 3 years, from my junior year of undergraduate through the first year of graduate school, at which point the physical distance of my move to Edinburgh had made what was already a quiet diminishment into something neither of us could sustain. We had ended things with a gentleness that said everything about the relationship. It was a kind ending. A dignified ending, an ending with no shouting and no broken things and no real grief on either side. Only a sort of mutual recognition that this had been what it was and now it was done. I had been sad for about 2 weeks. And then I had been fine. I was fine. I had had one other significant relationship, a year before Daniel. A boy named Marcus who was brilliant and charismatic and who I had been drawn to with an intensity that had frightened me a little. And that relationship had ended badly, with his betrayal and my devastation. And after that I had been very careful about intensity. None of this, I want to be clear, is what you might call a story of suppressed identity. I had not spent my teenage years secretly attracted to women while performing attraction to men. I had genuinely been attracted to boys, genuinely enjoyed those relationships, genuinely not thought of myself as anything other than straight in the way that you don't think about the assumptions that are built into the architecture of your life. It was not that I had been lying to myself. It was that I had simply never been given the opportunity to know. Something about myself that was waiting very quietly to be known. Rowan gave me that opportunity. And she did it at first simply by being herself in close proximity to me. After our second meeting, we began to see each other with a frequency that moved quickly from occasional to habitual. Twice a week, then 3 times. Then the weeks when we didn't have a formal arrangement but would inevitably run into each other, which stopped feeling like coincidence around the 3rd time it happened and started feeling like the city was conspiring. She came to my flat once, early on, to borrow a book, the one I had promised her in the cafeteria. Ursula K. Le Guin's The Word for World is Forest, and stood in my kitchen while the kettle boiled and looked at my bookshelf with the expression of someone reading a particularly revealing text. You have a lot of books about women discovering themselves, she said. Not unkindly. I study women's literature, I said. Of course, she said. And the slight tone in her voice, not ironic but gently knowing, made the back of my neck feel warm. She took the Le Guin and 2 other books I pressed on her and left after an hour. And my flat felt, for the first time since I had moved in, slightly too quiet. I noticed things about her with an attention that was starting to feel uncomfortable. The way she used her hands when she talked about her research, her fingers spreading to indicate the spread of fungal networks, the way she would trace invisible roots on the table surface, the specific quality of her laughter, how it always seemed to surprise even her like a reflex she hadn't planned. The fact that she was always slightly cold, always wrapped in too many layers, and yet insisted on living in Scotland, which seemed to me like a commitment to suffering. Why Edinburgh? I asked her once, over our 3rd or 4th coffee. My PhD offer, she said. But also she paused. I needed somewhere that felt like it had weight. Do you know what I mean? Somewhere that had been here long enough to have absorbed things. San Antonio must have that, surely. It does, I said. But I needed to be somewhere I hadn't already become someone. She looked at me with that particular attentiveness. Who were you becoming? Someone very sensible, I said. She smiled at this. And is Edinburgh succeeding in making me less sensible? I looked at her across the coffee shop table, at the sea glass eyes and the dark hair and the green coat and all of the strange, specific, overwhelming reality of her. Yes, I said. I think it might be. It was around this time that I noticed that when I described Rowan to my roommate Priya, who was warm, perceptive, and had a PhD student's appreciation for data, Priya had begun looking at me with an expression that I would describe as carefully neutral. She sounds lovely, Priya said. The 4th time I had apparently brought Rowan up in a single conversation. She is, I said. She's very interesting. She thinks about things differently. You should bring her round sometime, Priya said, still with that carefully neutral expression. We're just friends, I said. Of course, said Priya. I believe this entirely. This is important to understand. I was not aware of any internal dishonesty. I genuinely thought, this is a friendship, an extraordinary friendship, the kind that you are lucky to find once or twice in a lifetime. And the fact that it makes me feel like I have swallowed a small piece of sunlight is simply because real friendship does that. That is what friendship is for. I was, as I have said, not yet in possession of all the available information about myself. November arrived with real cold and early dark, and Rowan and I had settled into something that felt both entirely comfortable and faintly electric, like a live wire that you have made peace with being near. We had developed rituals. Tuesday coffees at the Elephant House. Thursday evening walks that almost always ended up at the Meadows, the wide park south of the university where the bare trees in November made beautiful geometric shadows against the sky. It was on one of these Thursday walks that she told me about her last relationship. We had been walking in the kind of companionable silence that had developed between us, the kind of silence that is not absence of communication, but a different mode of it, like switching from speech to touch. The cold was particular that evening, with a clear sky and frost beginning to silver the grass, and our breath made small clouds. I ended a relationship in June, she said. Not with any particular dramatics, just placing it into the quiet between us. 7 months ago. I haven't really talked about it, I waited. Her name was Claire, she said. We were together for 2 years. I registered this. Her name was. Claire was something that felt like a small electric shock followed by a rush of understanding so swift I barely caught it. In a fraction of a second, oh, she is gay. Followed immediately by, and why does that feel like something clicking into place? What happened? I asked out. Rowan was quiet for a long time. We walked past a frozen puddle on the path, and she stepped on it deliberately, the way you do, the gentle crack and crunch of it. I think we wanted different things, she said. Or we were in different places. She wanted stability, she wanted to stay in Edinburgh, to build something fixed and rooted. And she paused. I am not very good at fixed and rooted. Which is ironic, given that I spend my days studying the underground networks that hold forests together. Maybe you understand it better from the outside, I said. She looked at me sideways. You're quite good at that, she said. At what? At finding the thing that makes sense of something. The frame. I thought about what she had said about Claire, about wanting different things, about being unable to be what someone needed. I thought about Daniel, about my own clean, gentle, grief-free ending, and wondered if I, too, was not very good at fixed and rooted. Do you miss her? I asked. She considered this carefully. Turning her coffee cup around in her hands, she had brought a takeaway coffee on the walk. She always did, the small cylinder warm against her palms. I miss what I thought it would be, she said. The version of it I'd imagined before I understood it. That version, yes, I miss. The actual thing, she shook her head, gently, not with bitterness. The actual thing was something we both stayed in too long because leaving felt like failure. Leaving isn't failure, I said. No, she said. It's just late arrival at the truth. We walked in silence for a while. The meadows stretched around us, the paths lit by old orange lamps, the grass gray-silver with frost. Can I ask you something? I said, yes, she said, simply, when did you know? That you were. I hesitated over the language, aware of my own uncertainty about what word to use, what territory I was approaching. That you liked women? Rowan didn't seem at all surprised by the question. She thought about it. I was 17, she said. There was a girl in my year called Isla who played the violin, and I used to sit in the back of the school hall during rehearsals for the Christmas concert just to watch her play. For months. I told myself I admired how talented she was. And then one evening she was playing and she looked up and caught my eye across the hall and she made a small gesture with her free hand. I understood. Suddenly and completely. Like a light coming on in a room you thought was a closet and finding it's a whole other wing of the house. I was quiet. The image was perfect and it landed in me in a specific way. Were you frightened? I said. Terrified, she said, without drama. For about a week. And then liberated. Completely. Because it was true and the truth is always a relief. Even when it's complicated. We had reached the center of the meadows, where there was a large open expanse of grass and you could see in every direction. The city rimming the park with its lit windows. The castle and its rock in the distance to the north. She stopped walking and turned to look at me. Nadia, she said. And the specific quality of how she said my name made the hair on my arms stand up. What? I said. She looked at me for a moment with that direct attention. And there was something in her expression that was very careful and very kind and also something that I recognized. I think because I had seen it once before in the cafeteria. In that first look, that extra beat of held gaze. I recognized it because I had felt it on my own face. Nothing, she said, turning back to walk. Just I'm glad I met you. I stood still for 1 second before following her. I am glad I met you, Da. It is such a small sentence. 4 words. And yet, I walked home later that night with the frost crunching. Under my boots and the sky absolutely clear and full of stars, a rare Edinburgh night when the cloud cover lifted and you remembered that the universe was enormous and old and entirely indifferent. And somehow that was comforting. And I thought about light coming on in a room you thought was a closet, I thought. About that for a very long time. December. The city leaned into Christmas with a particular intensity the Royal Mile lined, with market stalls selling mulled wine and Crinachon and overpriced woolen things. The cold becoming something more serious, the dark arriving by 3 in the afternoon. Students were finishing semesters, submitting papers, making plans for the holidays. Rowan was going home to Edinburgh for Christmas. I was going home to San Antonio. I had not been back in over a year. And my mother's daily texts had taken on an escalating quality. That suggested the situation was approaching critical. We had about 2 weeks before we would both leave the city. And I was aware of those 2 weeks in a way I had never been aware of time before. Each day a countdown that felt faintly ominous without my being able to say quite what I was counting down toward or away from. I was not sleeping well. This was new. I have generally been an extremely competent sleeper, one of those people who is unconscious within minutes and stays that way until morning. But December brought with it a restlessness that kept me awake in the small hours. Lying in the dark of my flat while the wind moved along Morrison Street outside, thinking about things I had no proper vocabulary for yet, I thought about the way Rowan had looked at me in the meadows. I thought about the quality of her attention in general, and whether what I perceived as something particular and it was something particular, or whether I was constructing meaning out of ordinary friendship, because I was lonely and far from home, and she was the most interesting person I had encountered in years. I thought about Claire. I thought about the word Rowan had used, liberated. How she had said it without any difficulty as a simple fact. The truth is always a relief. I lay awake in the dark and tried to examine myself honestly, which is harder than it sounds when your whole life you have been the reliable one, the sensible one, the one who is always fine. I thought about the cafeteria look. I thought about the specific way my chest had felt in that one extra beat. I thought, what if I thought? No, I thought, but what if this is the part of the story that I am least proud of? Not because what I felt was wrong, but because of what I did with it. What I did with it was nothing. I was very busy not knowing. I was extremely competent at not knowing. I kept it all very tidily inside the category labeled friendship and refused to look at whether the category was correctly labeled. I told myself, you have never been with a woman. Therefore, you are not attracted to women. Therefore, this is friendship. The logic would not have survived a first-year philosophy seminar. But at the time it felt airtight. What helped was that Rowan gave me no particular reason to question my category. Because Rowan was, herself, extremely careful. She was warm and attentive and deeply present in our friendship, but she was also clearly not interested in destabilizing something that was working. Looking back, I understand this. She had seen things in me that I hadn't seen yet. And she was patient enough, generous enough, to let me arrive in my own time. This patience, I later learned, had cost her something, but that is later. We had a last coffee before Christmas. The Tuesday of the week we were both leaving. The Elephant House was festive in a restrained Scottish way, a small tree, some paper stars hanging from the wooden elephants. We sat at our usual table, the one by the window, and outside the Royal Mile was busy with tourists despite the cold and the sleet that had started mid-morning. "What are you doing for Christmas?" she asked. "Eating too much and being grilled about my thesis by my uncle, who is an accountant and does not understand that literary theory is a real discipline," I said. She laughed. "My sister is getting married in February and the family Christmas is going to be largely about the wedding. My mother has a spreadsheet. Do you like your sister's partner?" "I adore him," she said. "He's a completely ridiculous person who makes her laugh every single day. He once drove 4 hours to bring her a specific kind of cheese she'd mentioned offhandedly 6 months earlier." She paused. "That's love, isn't it? Remembering the small things." I thought about this. "I think that's one kind of love," I said. "The kind that pays attention." "Is there a kind that doesn't pay attention?" "There's the kind that means well," I said. "And there's the kind that actually sees." She looked at me. "And which kind do you want?" The question landed between us with a specificity that made me feel, briefly, transparent. "The second kind," I said. "I want the second kind." She nodded, slowly, still looking at me. "Me too." She said. We said goodbye on the pavement outside in the sleet. With the particular awkwardness of a farewell whose length is uncertain, she was going home for 3 weeks, I for 2. And there was a question hanging in the air about whether we would be in touch during that time. She hugged me. It was the first time we had hugged. It was brief and warm, and she smelled of cold air and the particular soap she used, something with juniper in it. And when she stepped back, I had to stop myself from reaching for her arm. "Happy Christmas." "Nadia from Texas," she said. "Happy Christmas." "Rowan from Edinburgh," I said. I watched her walk up the mile toward the bus stop. the green coat bright against the gray sleet street. And I stood there in the sleet getting rained on and didn't move until she was out of sight. Then I walked to the bus stop and all the way home and into my flat, and sat down at the kitchen table, and thought, oh Dot, I think I understand. Home was loud and warm, and full of people and smelled of my mother's tamales and my grandmother's perfume and the particular specific smell of the house I had grown up in that you only fully register when you have been away long enough. My mother embraced me at the airport for a long time without saying anything, and my father, who expresses love through acts of service, immediately picked up both my bags. My family is large and close and wonderful and completely exhausting. And being home for Christmas meant a rotating cast of aunts and uncles and cousins and family friends appearing at all hours. Everyone with opinions about my thesis and my life and the cold in Scotland, and whether I was eating enough. I love them with everything I have. I was also that December walking around inside a realization that was too new and too tender to share with anyone. Least of all a family for whom I had always been the reliable, sensible, always find one. My cousin Sophia, who is 3 years older than me and has always been my closest confidant in the family, noticed something on the second day. What is it? She asked, in the low register directness she has always had. The two of us in the kitchen while the rest of the family was watching a movie. Nothing, I said. Nadia. I'm just tired, I said. Edinburgh is there someone? She said. The word someone landed like a small explosion. I was quiet for too long. There's a friend, I said. Sophia poured us both more wine and leaned against the counter and said, with a gentleness that made my throat tight, tell me about your friend. I told her about Rowan, the cafeteria, the books, the coffee shop, the evening walks, the meadows at night, the Christmas farewell in the sleet. I told it as a story about a friend, but even as I was telling it, I could hear what it sounded like. How each detail was held with a specific weight. How every description of her came with too much precision. How I knew the exact color of her eyes and the particular way she laughed, and the smell of her coat. Sophia listened without interrupting. When I stopped, she was quiet for a moment. Nadia, she said, very gently. Yes? I said. How long have you known? I looked at the wine in my glass. About 3 weeks, I said. Properly. Maybe longer, really, without knowing that I knew. Are you okay? Was I okay? I thought about the honest answer. I was terrified and exhilarated and confused and certain all at the same time, and the certainty felt like the realest thing, the steady ground beneath all the other feelings. I was, in some fundamental sense, more okay than I had been in a long time. I was a better version of myself when I was around Rowan, and that was the fact that everything else had to arrange itself around. Yes, I said. Actually, I think I am. Does she know? I don't know, I said. I think maybe. We haven't talked about it. But you want we thought about the meadows in November. The frost. The clear sky. Glad I met you. Yes, I said. I do. Sophia reached across and covered my hand with hers. Good, she said. We texted while I was home. Rowan and I not extensively a photo she sent of the Borders hills covered in snow with the caption, "This is why I left," which made me laugh. A picture I sent of the Riverwalk decorated for Christmas with the caption, "This is why I almost stayed." Small things. The conversational equivalent of "I'm thinking of you." On Christmas Day she texted, "Merry Christmas. Nadia from Texas. I hope San Antonio is treating you well." I wrote back, "Merry Christmas, Rowan from Edinburgh. I miss Edinburgh." A pause. Then, "I miss Edinburgh too." Another pause. Then, "I'll be back on the 3rd. Tuesday coffee?" I stared at the message for a moment with the particular feeling of someone who's been walking toward a door and suddenly finds their hand on the handle. Yes, I wrote. Tuesday coffee. I was back in Edinburgh on the 2nd of January. I'd spent the flight San Antonio to Dallas, Dallas to London Heathrow, Heathrow to Edinburgh reading or trying to read, with the concentration of someone whose mind keeps slipping off the page and going somewhere else entirely. I cleaned my flat. I went to the supermarket. I tried to work on my thesis and failed, which was so unusual for me that it was itself informative. On the morning of Tuesday, January 5th, I got up, dressed carefully in a way I had never dressed for Tuesday coffee before, had an internal conversation with myself about what I was doing, declared a ceasefire. and walked to the elephant house. She was already there when I arrived. At our usual table, 2 coffees already ordered, the green coat over the back of her chair, and a book face down on the table, and her hands wrapped around her cup. She looked up when I came through the door. She smiled, and I walked toward her, across the coffee shop with my heart making absolutely no attempt at equanimity, and thought, here we go. Here we actually go. January was the month of almost reaching out. The long pauses in conversation that were full of everything neither of us had yet spoken. The moments when our hands were close on the table and neither of us moved them. The way she said my name, which I had stopped trying to pretend was ordinary. We were in a country I had no map for, and the language was one I was still learning. And the learning itself was part of the story. She brought me something from Edinburgh, a small paper bag from a bakery, containing 2 individual shortbreads wrapped in tissue paper and tied with a piece of red ribbon. She put it on the table when I arrived. My mother bakes these, she said. She sent them specifically. She sent them specifically? I was confused. She doesn't know me. I may have mentioned you, Rowan said, in a tone of elaborate casualness that did not fool either of us. I looked at the shortbreads. You told your mother about me. I told my mother I had made a very good friend in Edinburgh who was doing a PhD in literature and had given me 6 books in 3 months. That's fairly accurate, I said. My mother asked if you were single, she said. Still with that elaborate casualness, the air between us shifted. What did you tell her? I asked. I told her I didn't know, she said, and looked at me, and the look was a question and an answer at the same time. I am, I said. Single, if that's useful information. It might be, she said. We ate the shortbreads. They were extraordinary buttery and crumbly and faintly floral with something I couldn't identify. I told her so, and she said it was rosewater, her mother's innovation on the traditional recipe. She sounds wonderful, I said. She is. Very direct. She says things out loud that most people only think. I wish I were more like that, I said. And then, because something in January had shifted, because I had come back from San Antonio, with 2 weeks of quiet thinking behind me and a new clarity about what I was walking toward, I said, I've been thinking while I was away. About some things. She was very still. Things about yourself? She said carefully. About myself, I said. About what I want. What I might want. What I think I might feel. The coffee shop around us was its usual Tuesday self, the wooden elephants, the steam of the coffee machine, the low murmur of other conversations. Ordinary Edinburgh Tuesday. The most significant conversation of my life. I don't have the words exactly, I said. I stopped. It's okay, she said very quietly. I've never been here before, I said. In this, I gestured hopelessly at the air between us. Territory. She looked at me for a moment. I know, she said. I've known for a while. Does Eddie stopped again? Does it change anything? That I haven't considered this with the seriousness it deserved. It changes the pace, she said. Not the direction. I held the warmth of that sentence for a moment. I don't want you to wait for me to catch up, I said. That's not fair to you. I'm not waiting, she said. I'm just here. Where I'd like to be anyway. And if two looked at her, if I need time to then you have time, she said. Nadia, the specific way she said my name. I've been your friend for 3 months. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever this is or becomes, I'm not going anywhere. I felt something release in my chest. A tension I'd been holding so long I had stopped registering it as tension. Okay, I said. Okay, she said. We talked about other things for the rest of the coffee. Her sister's wedding preparations. My thesis. A book we had both recently read. Ordinary things, but under the ordinary things, something had been named. Not fully, not with clear words, but named nonetheless the way you can name a color without knowing its proper term, pointing at it and saying, that one. That particular shade. When we left the coffee shop, it had started to snow, which is unusual enough in Edinburgh to be notable. Light snow, more like frozen mist than proper flakes. Catching the light from the shop windows on the Royal Mile, we stood on the pavement for a moment watching it. Beautiful, I said. Yes, she said, and she was looking at me. I turned to look at her. The snow was in her hair, tiny points of light in the dark. "Rowan, not yet," she said gently. "When you're ready." Not yet, and she was right. And I knew she was right. And I loved her for it. I walked home through the snow alone, and the pavement was just beginning to dust white, and I thought, I am ready. I am almost ready. A little more time and I will be entirely ready. I did not know yet that readiness, real readiness, doesn't arrive in advance. It arrives in the moment itself if you let it. Was a Friday night in late January when everything finally shifted. And it shifted, as things often do in real life rather than in stories. Not because of a perfectly composed romantic moment, but because of a storm. January storms in Edinburgh are not tropical spectacles of thunder and lightning. They are horizontal rain and wind that reaches into you and removes any warmth you had. The kind of night where the sound against thee. Windows is constant and you stay indoors with all. The lights on and something hot and feel. Grateful for walls I had been at Rowan's flat for. The first time that evening we had finally crossed that threshold. The step from meeting in public spaces to being in each other's home. Her flat was in Fountainbridge, a compact, warm space on the second floor of an old tenement, full of books and an arrangement that was clearly meaningful to her but appeared random to an outsider. And plants on every windowsill, not the neglected kind but actual thriving plants. Which told me something about her, about the patience she gave things she cared for. She had cooked. This surprised me. We had eaten together plenty of times, but always in restaurants or cafes. She had made a fish stew with chunks of potato and leeks, the kind of deep, warming thing that is exactly right for a January night. And we had eaten it at her small kitchen table with a glass of wine each and talked without ceasing. The way we always did. After dinner we had moved to the sofa with the second glass of wine and put on a film, something she'd been recommending for weeks. A quiet French film about two women in Brittany, which I will not name here because the story I am telling is my own, and I do not want to give the impression that a film told me who I was. The film was beautiful, quiet, full of looks that meant things without speaking them. I watched it with my shoulder barely an inch from hers. Around 10 o'clock the storm properly arrived. The windows rattled. The rain came down with a new commitment. I checked my phone and there was a message from Priya. "Don't try to get home tonight. The buses on Morrison Street are all suspended. The roads flooded." I showed Rowan the message. "You'll stay," she said immediately. It was not a question. "If that's, the sofa's comfortable," she said. "And I have a spare toothbrush." It is such a practical detail, the spare toothbrush, and yet it lodged in me like something significant. This spare toothbrush meant she was someone who was prepared for people to stay, who held space for others. It meant something about generosity. We were quiet for a while after the film ended, the storm outside making the flat feel more enclosed, more particular. The lamplight was warm. The plants on the windowsill trembled slightly in the rattle of the glass. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You always ask that," she said. "And you always ask anyway. You don't need the preamble." I laughed. "Fair," I paused. "What made you talk to me?" "In the cafeteria. I mean, I spoke first technically about the book. But before that, when I asked if I could sit, I was searching for the word. Something." She was quiet for a moment, turning her wineglass. "I noticed you," she said, "when you came in. Before you asked about the seat." "Noticed me how?" She looked at me directly. "You know how," she said. The room was very quiet under the sound of the storm. "Tell me anyway." I said. "You came in and you were looking for somewhere to sit and you were carrying your soup in your bag and trying not to let anything spill. And you had a sort of," she made a small gesture, "a purposefulness about you. Like someone who is very competent at managing everything except what she actually wants. I felt seen in a way that was both uncomfortable and exactly right." "Is that how you see me?" I said. "I see someone who is brave enough to move to Scotland on her own and read dense feminist literary theory and talk to strangers about mycorrhizal networks," she said. "And who is also," she paused, "still working out what she actually wants." "And what do you think she wants?" I said. My voice was steady. I was genuinely impressed with my voice. She looked at me. The storm rattled the windows. The lamplight was amber and warm. "I think she wants something she hasn't let herself want before," she said. "And I think she's getting there." We sat with that for a moment. And then, because I had been moving toward this for 3 months and I was here, in this warm room with this woman and the storm outside, and no bus home and everything quite perfectly arranged for something to happen. I said, I think I'm there. She was very still. Are you sure? She said. Yes, I said. And I was... The certainty was complete and calm, the way I had imagined certainty might feel, not a fanfare but a settling. Everything finding its proper level. She turned to face me more fully on the sofa, her knee touching my knee, and looked at me with that particular attention. That quality of really looking, and said, Is it okay if I... Yes? I said, She kissed me, It was, I want to be careful here. Not to make it larger than itself or smaller either. It was a first kiss, which means it was tentative and warm and lasted approximately 4 seconds before we both pulled back to look at each other. Her eyes were open. Mine were too. Oh, I said. The most inadequate syllable in the English language. Oh, she agreed. And there was something in her voice, wonder and relief, and the specific happiness of a thing that has been hoped for arriving. She kissed me again. And this time neither of us pulled back for longer. The storm went on outside and the flat was warm, and I had thought I might feel frightened, and instead I felt, with absolute clarity, like someone who has been standing outside a house in the rain and has finally been let in. The days that followed were extraordinary in the way that beginnings always are. That particular quality of the world, being simultaneously the same world and an entirely different one. The streets of Edinburgh unchanged and yet lit differently now. Everything slightly more vivid, the cold feeling clean rather than just cold. The dark of January feeling like privacy rather than absence of light. We were careful with each other. This is what I remember most about those first weeks, the carefulness. Not hesitation, there was no returning to hesitation. I had crossed that particular bridge and it was gone, but attentiveness. The specific attention of two people who are learning each other's thresholds, learning what each other needs and how to offer what they have. Rowan was patient with my newness in a way that never made me feel like a project. She never treated me as someone who needed to be educated or initiated. She treated me as myself, a specific person with specific responses and preferences that had nothing to do with my experience and everything to do with who I was. This was, I would come to understand, one of the most important gifts she gave me, I told my roommate Priya, on the Saturday morning after the storm. I came home in the previous night's clothes with what I suspected was an entirely transparent expression, and Priya looked at me from the kitchen and said, The friend? The friend, I said. She made us both a cup of tea and said, Tell me everything, and I did. And at the end of it she said, I have been waiting for this since October, and I said, Was it that obvious? And she said, with great affection, Nadia, you literally described the color of her eyes within the first week. I called Sophia that afternoon. She'd been waiting, she said, for exactly this call, and she cried a little. Which made me cry a little, and then she said something I have thought about many times since. You've always been so good at knowing what other people need. It's really lovely to hear you know what you need. It is, I think, one of the nicest things anyone has ever said to me. The learning of Rowan Calloway was the great occupation of those months. There is a particular joy in the early period of loving someone, the joy of discovery, the opening of rooms. Every day some new thing, her habit of singing very quietly under her breath when she was doing something domestic, under her breath and never quite on key. Her commitment to the opinion that no meal was complete without something green. Her relationship with her research, which was not the relationship of someone doing a job, but of someone in the presence of something they found genuinely miraculous every day. I went with her to the university's botanic garden one pale February afternoon where she had a project observing a particular section of woodland. She explained as we walked through the bare winter trees how the fungal networks beneath our feet were alive and working even in February, moving nutrients between trees, exchanging chemical signals, sustaining young seedlings in the shade of older trees. They're talking to each other, I said. In a sense, she said. Chemically. But yes. The old trees, the big ones, the ones that have been here longest, they're the hubs. They support more connections. When a tree dies, sometimes the network maintains the root for years, keeps passing resources through what was there. I stopped. That's extraordinary. They hold the space for what's gone. She looked at me. Yes, she said. I've never heard it put that way before, but yes. We stood in the middle of the woodland. Our breath-making clouds, the bare trees around us in their winter quiet. And I reached for her hand. She took it without looking at me. Simply took it, warm and certain. Rowan. I said yes? I think the words were unexpectedly difficult. Not because of uncertainty, but because of the size of what I was trying to say. I think this is the truest thing that's ever happened to me. She was quiet for a moment. Then she squeezed my hand. For me too, she said. It was February 11th. 2 days before Valentine's Day, which we both professed indifference to and then celebrated anyway. With a dinner she cooked and a book I gave her, a first edition of The Left Hand of Darkness. Again, found after considerable effort and expense at a bookshop on the Canongate. And the specific joy of having found something you did not know you were looking for. Spring in Edinburgh arrived slowly and then all at once. Like a long-delayed letter that has finally been delivered. March brings daffodils on the meadows, great drifts of them. And probably yellow against the gray city and longer light in the evenings. And the first days when you go out without the full armor of winter layers and feel the air on your face like a kind of permission. Rowan's sister married in February. And Rowan came back from the wedding glowing with a warmth that was entirely about other people's happiness, which is one of the rarest things. She showed me photographs on her phone, her youngest sister as maid of honor, making a speech that had apparently made everyone cry. Her parents dancing. The groom, who was indeed a completely ridiculous person and who appeared in every photo with an expression of disbelieving joy. He loves her so much, Rowan said, scrolling through the photos. It's wonderful and slightly embarrassing to witness. That's the best kind of love, I said. The kind that's slightly embarrassing, she looked at me. Are we slightly embarrassing? Extremely, I said. Priya once told me she can hear me smiling when I'm on the phone to you through the wall. She laughed. That sudden bright laugh. My sister asked me at the wedding if I was happy. Just out of nowhere, in between the cake and the dancing. She just grabbed my arm and looked at me and said, "Are you happy? What did you say?" I said yes. And I meant it completely. We were sitting in her flat, a Sunday morning in March. Coffee and books and the particular comfortable intimacy of two people who have become part of each other's ordinary life. She was in the armchair and I was on the sofa with my feet up and one of her books in my hands. I had developed the habit of reading her books, which she found variously charming and annoying depending on whether I had moved her bookmark. The Sunday morning light came through the plants on the windowsill and made patterns on the floor. I thought, I'm happy, completely, in a way I had not previously known was available. In April, once submitted a chapter of my thesis that my supervisor described as genuinely brilliant, which was not a word she had previously used. And I thought, this is what happens when your life is actually open. The work gets better when the person gets better. In May, Rowan received news that a paper she had co-authored with her supervisor had been accepted in the major environmental science journal. She called me the moment she heard, and her voice on the phone was so fully, purely delighted that I started crying, which she thought was both sweet and an overreaction. And I said, it's not an overreaction. It's exactly the right reaction. You've worked on this for 2 years. And she said, you're extraordinary, and I said, I'm right. And she said, both things can be true. Edinburgh's summer arrived, which is mild and long-eveninged and beautiful. We walked everywhere up Arthur's Seat in the early morning when the city was quiet below us, along the water of Leith through the parks, out to Portobello Beach on the good days where we sat on the sand, and I thought, I could be here. I could be here for a very long time. It was on Arthur's Seat, actually, on a Thursday evening in June when the light was still full at 9 o'clock and the whole city spread below us in the golden air, that I said, I love you. I had been working up to it for weeks and in the end arrived without ceremony. Sitting on the slope of the hill with the city below and a light wind in the grass, she turned to look at me. And her face did the thing it did when something mattered, went very still, very open. I love you too, she said. I have for a while. How long? She smiled. November, she said. Maybe before. The Meadows, I said. The Meadows, she confirmed. I thought about that Thursday evening in November. The frost on the grass, the clear sky with its stars. The specific quality of her voice saying, I'm glad I met you. I was so slow. I said, you were exactly as fast as you needed to be. she said. You were very patient. You were worth being patient for. She said, simply, the city was gold below us. The grass moved in the light wind. A bird somewhere was making its evening sound. I leaned into her shoulder and she leaned into me. And we sat on the side of the ancient hill and looked at the city and said nothing at all for a while. Which was its own kind of conversation. I would be doing this story a disservice if I only told you the beautiful parts. Love is not only beautiful. It is also the particular friction of two people with different histories and different habits and different ways of needing things. Learning to inhabit the same space. We argued for the first time in July. About something I will not detail because the specifics are private and also slightly embarrassing, but which was essentially about the way I tend to withdraw when I feel overwhelmed, and the way that withdrawal feels to Rowan, who experienced it as abandonment before she understood it as self-protection. We argued on the phone at midnight. She was at her flat. I was at mine, and there was a period of about 20 minutes where both of us were genuinely upset, and the conversation had that specific quality of going in circles, of saying the same things in slightly different words and arriving at the same impasse. And then she said, Nadia, stop. I stopped. Tell me what you actually need right now, she said. I stood in my kitchen in the dark with my hand pressed to my forehead. I need you not to need anything from me for 10 minutes. I need to. I was trying to find the honest word. Reconstitute. A pause. Then, okay, she said. 10 minutes. Call me back. She hung up. I stood in the dark kitchen. I breathed for 10 minutes. I thought about what she had said and what I had said, and where the misunderstanding was and how to say what I meant clearly. I called her back. Okay, I said. Here's what happened on my end, and I told her. Really told her, not defensively, not to win, but to be understood. And she listened, and then she told me what had happened on her end, with the same honesty and the same good faith, and we found the misunderstanding. The actual one. The one underneath the surface one. Which was, in the end, about both of us being frightened. In the same direction, both afraid of the other. Person becoming unreachable and expressing that fear in opposite ways. I withdraw because I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing and losing you. I said, I press because I'm afraid of the withdrawal being permanent. She said, I need you to trust that the withdrawal is temporary. I need you to tell me when you're withdrawing. So I know it's not the end. I can do that. I said, and I can give you the 10 minutes. She said, we were quiet for a moment. This is the bit no one tells you. She said, what bit? That love is mostly negotiation, she said. Not the romantic kind. The practical kind. Working out how two different people can fit together without damaging each other. I find negotiation romantic, I said. She laughed, the sudden bright one. I know, she said. That's one of the things I love most about you. We hung up and I sat at my kitchen table and thought about what she had said. The practical negotiation. The working out. How it is not a failure to need to work things out, but rather the evidence of taking each other seriously. Of believing the relationship is worth the effort. My mother, who's been married to my father for 31 years, once told me that a good relationship is not one without difficulty, but one where the difficulty makes you better rather than worse. Your father drives me mad, she said, with the warmth of someone describing something they would not trade. But every time we work through something, I know us better. And knowing someone, really knowing someone, that's the point. I understand that now in a way I didn't before Rowan. We had other arguments, as all honest people who live closely do. About small things whose turn it was to do what, whether the heating was on too high. About larger things, about the future specifically. About what the future looked like after our PhDs were done and the question of where to be and what for arose. This last argument, in autumn of our second year, was the hardest. Her postdoctoral options were in two places, one in Edinburgh, where she was already established, one at a research center in Vancouver, which was a better opportunity professionally. My own trajectory after my PhD was less clear. Academia is a brutal market. And I'd been thinking about other things, about writing, about what I actually wanted to do with the rest of my working life. We sat with this uncertainty for a while, without trying to resolve it, which was a mark of how much we had both grown. The patience to sit with an unresolved thing without panicking. I don't want Vancouver without you, she said one evening. Simply, factually. I don't want to be the reason you don't go to Vancouver, I said. Then come with me, she said. To Vancouver? It's a wonderful city, she said. I've been told. Have you been told that it's in Canada? I'm aware. I looked at her. She looked back, steady and certain. You're serious. I said, I'm always serious, she said. You're not always serious. I'm always serious about you. She said. I was quiet for a moment. Give me time to think, I said. You have time, she said. And I thought about the version of myself that had arrived in Edinburgh 2 years before, tightly organized, reliably fine, someone who managed everything except what she actually wanted. I thought about the cafeteria and the coffee shop and the walks and the frost on the meadows and the storm and the plants on the windowsill in the morning, light in the flat and 2 years of Tuesday coffees and evening walks and arguments worked through and books shared, and a love that had, in 2 years, become as much a part of my life as breathing. I thought about what I wanted to write, about the fact that I'd been keeping, since January the previous year, a private journal, not a thesis. Not an academic document, but a real record, a story. The story of what was happening to me and what I was learning about myself. I had shown no one this journal, but it existed, and it was the truest writing I had done. I thought about Vancouver, a city I had never seen, at the edge of another country, mountains on one side and ocean on the other. The beginning of something new. I thought about what Rowan had said in the cafeteria that very first afternoon, about how she had come to Edinburgh because she needed somewhere with weight, somewhere that had been here long enough to have absorbed things. I had said I needed to be somewhere I hadn't already become someone. I had become someone here in Edinburgh. A real someone. The truest version of myself I had yet been taught. Was that Edinburgh? Or was it Rowan? The answer, I thought, was both. But the ingredient I couldn't leave behind was clear. I called my mother. There's something I need to tell you, I said. A pause. The particular loaded silence of a mother preparing to receive news. Are you okay? I'm wonderful, I said. Mom, I'm really happy. I'm calling to tell you I'm happy. Another pause. Oh, she said, and her voice shifted into something warm and a little relieved. Oh, Mia. Tell me. I told her about Rowan, not the abbreviated version, not the careful friend narrative I had been offering for a year. The whole thing. Who she was, what she meant, how I'd fallen, how it had changed me, how it had made me better. My mother was quiet for a long time. 2 years, she said, finally. You've been carrying this for 2 years. Not carrying, I said. Living, just quietly. Are you happy? She said, the same question Rowan's sister had asked. The question that goes to the center. I am, I said. Completely. Then that's what matters, she said. That's all that matters. She cried a little. I cried a little? She said she wanted to meet Rowan. I said she would. She said, you know, I always knew there was something you hadn't told me. I didn't know what it was, but I knew. And I said, Mom, I didn't know either. And she said, I know. I know, my love. I called my father, who said very little, but whose voice was thick and warm, and who said at the end, I just want you to be loved right. Is she good to you? And I said, she's extraordinary. And he said, okay then. I called Sophia, who said, finally. Finally, you told her. I've been waiting. And I said, I told my parents, not Rowan. And Sophia said, I meant finally you told your parents. And I realized she had known what I meant before I had. As she always does, that evening I went to Rowan's flat. She was at her desk working, still in her research day clothes, the green coat hanging on the door, 2 empty coffee cups beside her laptop. She looked up when I came in. Read something in my face, Nadia? I'll go to Vancouver, I said. She stood up. You don't have to, I know, I said. I want to. I want to go somewhere I haven't already become someone and become someone new. With you? She crossed the room and took my face in her hands with a gentleness that made me want to cry. Are you sure? She said, for the second time in our story. Always checking. Always making room. Yes, I said for the second time. I'm sure. She kissed me, and it was nothing like the first kiss in the storm. It was its own particular thing. The kiss of 2 people who know each other fully and have chosen each other with that full knowledge. Which is a different kind of kiss entirely. Outside the window, Edinburgh was going about its evening. The amber lamplight, the old stones, the hill with the castle on it, the long history of the city, everything it had absorbed, the weight of it. It had been for 2 years. Exactly what I needed it to be. We had 8 more months in Edinburgh before Vancouver. 8 months of finishing our PhDs, finishing chapters, finishing the long domestic project of people who had been living mostly separately and were beginning to arrange their lives for something different. We decided, in October, to move in together. Not as a prelude to Vancouver, but for themselves, those 8 months. Because we wanted to. Finding a flat together was an education in the practical realities of love, which are various and occasionally absurd. We looked at 6 flats before finding the right one in Marchmont, the neighborhood of broad quiet streets and tall tenement buildings south of the Meadows. The flat was on the 3rd floor, with large windows and a kitchen where 2 people could exist at the same time without catastrophe, and a second room that could be a study. Moving her books in with my books took 3 hours and produced a minor philosophical debate about organization systems. She organized by subject and then by author within subject. I organized by a system that was primarily associative and thematic, and that she described correctly as charming but not functional. We compromised her system. But with annotations, I submitted my thesis in November and felt, afterward, the specific exhausted emptiness of having finished a very long project, like a room after all the furniture has been moved out. I stood in the university library after hitting send on the final submission and thought, what now? What now was writing. The journal I had been keeping for 2 years, which had grown in ways I hadn't quite tracked, into something much larger, chapters, a narrative, a story that began with a look in a cafeteria and was still going. I told Rowan about it on a Sunday morning over coffee. The flat quiet around us, the Marchmont Street outside pale with late autumn light. I've been writing something, I said. She looked up from her book. Something other than the thesis? For 2 years, I said. Since January of last year. I've been keeping it. I suppose it's a memoir. A story. Our story? My story, I said. Though you're in it. You're rather central. She was quiet for a moment, and I watched the complex thing that moved across her face, something like vulnerability, something like hope. May I read it someday? She said. When it's done, I said. Yes, when will it be done? I'm not sure, I said. Maybe when I understand what the ending is. She smiled. The ending is ongoing, she said. That's rather good, I said. I might use that. Feel free, she said, and went back to her book. In December, Rowan defended her PhD. I was in the waiting room outside the examination room for the hour and 40 minutes of the Viva, which was the longest hour and 40 minutes of my life, considerably more stressful than my own Viva in which I was actually present. When she came out with the examiner's report, a pass with minor corrections, which is the best possible outcome, her face had the particular expression of someone who has been asked to be very serious for a long time and is now allowed to stop. I hugged her in the corridor of the academic building, surrounded by the smell of old carpets and institutional coffee. And she said into my shoulder, it's done. It's actually done. Dr. Calloway, I said. She pulled back and laughed, that sudden bright laugh. Dr. Vasquez in about 3 months, she said. Technically not there yet, I said. Technicalities, she said, and kissed me in the corridor, which caused a passing professor to look studiously in another direction. We had a small celebration that evening. Priya came, and Rowan's friend Jamie from the department, and we ate too much and drank enough, and at midnight, when the others had gone and we were washing up in the kitchen of the Marchmont flat, Rowan said, 5 months. 5 months, I agreed. 5 months until Vancouver. Until the next thing. Until the ongoing ending. The last Edinburgh winter was cold and grey and very beautiful in the particular way of cities you love, where even the difficult weather is part of what you love about it. We walked the city one more time in those months, all the walks we had done before, retracing the Meadows, Arthur's Seat, the Royal Mile, Portobello Beach in January with the North Sea grey and wild and magnificent. We went back to the Elephant House, sat at our table by the window, ordered the same coffees. 1.5 years ago, I said. I was reading Braiding Sweetgrass, she said. You just got into the chapter about the pecan grove, I said. You were dreading it. It was worth it, she said. I looked at her across the table in the coffee shop where it had started. The wooden elephants and the condensation on the windows and the sound of the espresso machine and the gray January day outside. You were wearing your green coat. I said, I'm wearing it now, she said. She was. The same green coat, somewhat more worn now, a small repair at one cuff that she had done herself. I looked at you, I said, and something happened. I didn't know what it was. And now? She said. Now I know, I said. It was the beginning. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. It was the beginning, she confirmed. Outside, the Royal Mile went on with its business. A tourist took a photograph of the castle. A delivery cyclist navigated the cobblestones. The rain began again, soft and persistent. The Edinburgh rain that is just always there. I turned my hand over and held hers. Here at this table. In this city, in this coat, with this specific quality of winter light, all of it. I wanted to hold all of it and take it with me. Vancouver arrived in June like a completely different kind of promise. We flew from Edinburgh in the morning, changed in London, and arrived in the evening into a city of extraordinary light, the long Pacific Northwest summer evening. The mountains still showing snow above the city. The ocean right there, the sky going pink and gold over everything. Coming out of the airport into that evening was a physical shock. Not of temperature, but of scale, the mountains huge and close, the sky enormous, the air different. Clean and green smelling in a way Edinburgh never quite was. We had a small apartment in the neighborhood of Mount Pleasant, on the second floor of a building with a view of the mountains from the kitchen window, which Rowan said was non-negotiable and which I agreed was a reasonable non-negotiation. The apartment was unfurnished. We had shipped 2 boxes of books and very little else. Starting mostly fresh, and for the first 2 weeks, we slept on an air mattress and sat on the floor to eat. I did not mind the air mattress. There is something about the beginning of things. The empty rooms, the absence of accumulated stuff. That feels like the purest form of the thing itself. We built the place slowly. The way you want to build a home rather than install one. Furniture from second-hand shops. Bookshelves first, always bookshelves first. Plants for the windowsills. She had firm opinions about which plants, and I let her have them entirely. Because the Vancouver flat with its plants became its own kind of beautiful. Green and alive against the mountain view. Her research center was in the University District, a 40-minute bike ride. And she was there from the first week with the energy of someone given an entirely new set of instruments. Her postdoctoral project was about the forest ecosystems of British Columbia, which meant she spent days in actual forest, which meant she came home in the evening smelling of pine and alive in a way that was specific to being in forests, bright-eyed and slightly muddy and full of things she had seen. I had made a decision in those last Edinburgh months about what I wanted to do. I was not going to pursue an academic position. I wanted to write. Not the thesis, not the scholarly articles, but the thing I had been quietly writing for 2 years in the journal. I had spoken to a literary agent in Edinburgh who had read the first 50 pages and said, "This is something. Keep going." So I kept going. In the mornings, while Rowan was at the research center, I sat at the kitchen table with the mountain view and the coffee and wrote. I wrote the story you are reading now. I wrote it slowly and carefully, trying to get it right, trying to honor both the truth of what had happened and the truth of what it meant. I should tell you where we are. I am writing this at the kitchen table in the Mount Pleasant apartment. The mountains outside the window, a coffee going cold beside the laptop because I keep forgetting to drink it. Rowan is at the forest today. She texted an hour ago. Found something extraordinary in the roots. Telling you tonight. I texted back. Can't wait. She will come home at 6. She will be slightly muddy. She will wash her hands at the kitchen sink and tell me about the something extraordinary in the roots, and her face will do the thing it does, that complete, unguarded aliveness. The joy of someone in the presence of something they love. I will listen with the full attention I have learned from watching her and then we will cook dinner. Together in the small kitchen that is exactly right for 2 people if neither of them is in a hurry. We will eat with the windows open if it is warm, or at the table with the lamp on if it has gone cold. We will probably talk about books or research or the city or my writing or the forests of British Columbia or her family or mine, or something we have both read or thought. And at some point in the evening, in the middle of something ordinary, she will say my name Nadia in the specific way she has always said it. With that particular cadence, like it is something she is tasting. Something she knows the flavor of. And I will think, this is it. This is the thing I want to tell you finally. What I think that first look was it was not love at first sight, which I do not believe in. Or at least which I do not think captures what actually happens in those first encounters. What it was, I think, was recognition. Not of a face or a person, but of a possibility, the sudden, wordless understanding that there was something available here that had not been available before. A door in a wall you had walked past your whole life without knowing it was a door. I did not know. At 23, sitting across from a stranger in a cafeteria in Edinburgh, that I was capable of loving women, or specifically of loving this woman. I did not know that the life I had been carefully building, the sensible, organized, always find life was missing something I hadn't yet named. The look told me something I wasn't able to hear properly for several months. It said, pay attention. Something is here, and I paid attention. Slowly and in my own time and with a great deal of not quite knowing, and here is what I found, myself. The truest version, the one that had been waiting patiently inside all the sensible management. The one that could be moved to tears by a book about plant biology and could stand on the side of a hill at night and feel, with complete clarity, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. This is the part of the story I want to leave you with. Whoever you are reading this, the recognition is not always loud. It is sometimes very quiet. It is sometimes a look across a room that lasts 1 second too long. It is sometimes a conversation about a book that goes on for 2 hours when you only meant to say hello. It is sometimes the feeling of walking home through a city at night with the heat of a new friendship in your chest, telling yourself it is only friendship, while something much larger and truer waits with the patience of a growing thing for you to be ready. If you have felt this quiet recognition and looked away from it, I understand. I looked away from it for months. I had very good reasons, or at least I thought I did. The reasons were mostly fear, though they wore the disguises of practicality and sensibility. What I can tell you from the other side of looking away and then looking back, it is worth it. The looking back. The willingness to stand in the discomfort of not knowing and let the knowing find you. The truth is always a relief. Rowan told me even when it's complicated, she was right. She's usually right, which is one of many things I find both endearing and occasionally exasperating about her. I am a different person than the woman who walked into that cafeteria. Not unrecognizably different, the thesis is still being written, different thesis now. Different form, the books are still being read, the coffee is still going cold. But I am more myself. There is more of me accessible to the world and to the people I love, because I know more of what is there. I told you at the beginning that I was writing this for the people who have felt a look and looked away. I am also writing it, I realize now at the end of it, for my past self. For the 23-year-old who sat in the cafeteria and felt the key turn in the lock and thought, no, that cannot be right. It was right. It was more right than anything. Rowan came home at 6:15. She was slightly muddy. She washed her hands at the kitchen sink. The something extraordinary in the roots, I said. It was a connection I've never seen before in this kind of forest, she said. Drawing her hands, her face doing the thing. 2 trees, a Douglas fir and a western red cedar, completely different species sharing the same mycorrhizal network. Sharing nutrients. Supporting each other, different species, I said. Supporting each other, she confirmed. That, I said, is the ending. She looked at me across the kitchen. The mountains were still visible through the window and the last of the evening light. The plants on the windowsill were doing what plants do, quietly, persistently alive. Of the book? She said. Of the book, I said. She smiled the full smile, the real one. The one that rearranges her face into something so open and unguarded that it still, after 2 years, feels like being given a gift. Tell me about the beginning, she said. You already know the beginning, I said. I know my version, she said. Tell me yours, so I told her. All of it. The cafeteria, the look, the key in the lock. The months of not knowing. The coffee shop, the meadows, the storm, the winter. The spring, Arthur's Seat, Edinburgh, Vancouver. The kitchen table, the mountain view, the morning coffee gone cold. All of it. The whole true story. She listened with her full attention, completely still. eyes on my face and the way she has always listened, which is to say, as if every word is something she is glad to be given. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, then she said, "It was just one look." "Just one look," I said. "And it changed everything," she said. "Everything," I said. Outside, the mountains held the last of the light. In the roots of the forests on those mountains, the networks were alive and working, moving things between trees. Different species, different kinds. Connected underground in ways you couldn't see from above. Inside, the lamp was on. The coffee was cold. The woman I love was looking at me the way she has looked at me since a rainy Tuesday in October. A look that still lasts one beat too long, still says, "Pay attention." Something is here. I pay attention. Something is here. Something extraordinary.